Gemma McCluskie was a rising star with a bright future, but behind the walls of her East London home, her brother Tony was nursing a deadly rage that would end her life in the most unthinkable way. Gemma McCluskie was a young woman whose name many people in Britain recognized thanks to her brief but memorable role in the beloved soap opera EastEnders. Her bright smile and natural warmth made her instantly likable, both on and off screen. Born and raised in East London, Gemma grew up surrounded by friends, family, and a close-knit neighborhood. People described her as someone full of life, a person who lit up a room without even trying. After appearing on EastEnders in 2001 as Carrie Skinner, Gemma dreamed of building a lasting acting career. Though her role was short, it left a mark, and many viewers remembered her face years later. She still clung to hopes of returning to acting, but life had taken her in a different direction. By 2012, she was living with her brother Tony in a modest house in Bethnal Green. Their parents had passed away, and the siblings relied on each other for support, sharing bills and household responsibilities. At first glance, their living arrangement seemed ordinary, but behind the scenes, tensions were slowly growing. Tony struggled with alcohol addiction, and his drinking habits had become more destructive over time. While Gemma tried to keep peace in the house, Tony's unpredictable moods created a stressful environment. Arguments were becoming more frequent, mostly sparked by Tony's behavior when he was drunk. Gemma loved her brother and wanted him to get help, but it was exhausting to keep trying to fix the chaos he brought into their lives. Friends would later say that Gemma had become frustrated, feeling like she was trapped in a cycle of shouting. An apology still, she never lost her kindness or the hope that things could get better. Gemma spent time with friends, stayed active in her community, and maintained dreams of going back to performing someday. Her social circle adored her for her down-to-earth nature, and she remained a familiar face around local shops and cafes. She always had a kind word or a warm hug for people she cared about. Gemma seemed to carry the spirit of her old television role into real life, kind, relatable, and unafraid to stand up for what was right. In early March 2012, Gemma had been helping plan an event for a local hospital and was excited to take part. It was the sort of cause she believed in, a way to give back and stay connected. She talked to her friends about it, sounding upbeat and ready to contribute. From the outside, no one suspected that her home life was growing more tense with every passing day. Her brother's drinking continued to spiral, and their arguments turned more bitter, especially over the smallest household problems. Gemma tried to hold her ground, but Tony's resentment seemed to build in quiet, dangerous ways. The people closest to Gemma had no idea that these daily stresses were reaching a boiling point. She hid most of it, putting on a brave face, believing she could manage Tony's mood swings if she just stayed strong. But in that small Bethnal Green house, a tragic fate was creeping closer. Gemma, so full of hope and plans for her future, could never have imagined how quickly everything would be taken away. On March 1st, 2012, Gemma McCluskie vanished from her home without warning, sending waves of panic through her circle of friends and family. She had been excited to attend the opening of a new hospital wing she had helped support, but she never showed up. This was completely out of character for Gemma, who was known for being reliable and dedicated to her commitments. Friends tried calling her phone, expecting her to answer with her usual cheerful voice, but there was only silence. As the hours ticked by, worry turned into deep fear. Gemma had never gone missing before. Her sudden disappearance made no sense to those who loved her. Her brother Tony told people she had simply gone out and hadn't come back, acting as though there was nothing unusual about it. But to Gemma's friends, this explanation felt empty. She would never leave without telling someone where she was going. They decided to call the police and report her missing, desperate to get help before it was too late. Officers arrived at the Bethnal greenhouse to investigate, looking through her belongings, talking to neighbors, and trying to build a timeline of her last known movements. There was no sign of a struggle in the house, no immediate clue about where Gemma had gone. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. As word spread through the community, people stepped forward to help. Posters went up with Gemma's photograph, her bright smile beaming from street poles and shop windows. The community organized search parties, combing through nearby parks and streets, hoping to spot any clue. Local news outlets covered the story, showing Gemma's family making heartbreaking public appeals for information. They stood in front of cameras with tearful faces, begging anyone who might know something to speak up. The case drew a wave of sympathy, with strangers offering their support and sharing Gemma's image on social media in the hope of finding answers. Meanwhile, the police continued their search, interviewing anyone who had seen Gemma in the days before she went missing. Friends described her as worried about her brother's drinking, but otherwise upbeat and excited about her plans. Investigators learned about the rising tension inside the house, but had no physical evidence of a crime. Tony, who had lived with Gemma, insisted he knew nothing about where she had gone. The police noted his calm behavior, but could not arrest him without proof. As days turned into a week, Gemma's family grew increasingly desperate. Her mother's friends and former co-stars from EastEnders joined in, urging the public to stay alert. Despite all the posters and news coverage, there was no break in the case. Her disappearance had become a haunting mystery, with no clear answers and no sign of Gemma anywhere. It was as if the ground had swallowed her up, leaving only worry and grief behind. The community refused to give up hope, but a sense of dread was growing, a fear that Gemma might never come home. 8 days after Gemma McCluskie was first reported missing, the mystery took a devastating turn. On March 6, 2012, a grim discovery was made in Regent's Canal, a quiet waterway that cuts through East London. Passerby noticed a large suitcase floating just below the surface, tangled in weeds near a footpath. Something about its weight and the way it bobbed in the water seemed wrong, so the person called the police. When officers arrived to pull it out, they were met with a terrible sight. The suitcase was waterlogged and badly stained, but nothing could have prepared them for what they found inside. Wrapped in plastic bags and duct tape, human remains had been stuffed into the cramped space. The sight shocked even experienced detectives. The suitcase was rushed to a forensic lab, where specialists began working to identify the body. Days of water damage made the task difficult, but experts carefully searched for clues, taking samples and running DNA tests. Back at the police station, investigators feared they already knew who it might be. Everyone hoped, against hope, that it was not Gemma, but deep down, they sensed the worst. The tests finally confirmed what her family had been dreading. The remains belonged to Gemma McCluskie. The shock rippled instantly through the community. People who had been praying for her safe return were now faced with the cruel reality of her murder. As news spread, the heartbreak was overwhelming. Candlelit vigils were held in Bethnal Green, where neighbors gathered to remember Gemma's kindness and the joy she had brought to their lives. Flowers piled up outside her house, and people left cards filled with messages of love and sorrow. The sense of loss was raw, a wound cutting across an entire community. The discovery also sent police into overdrive, transforming their missing person investigation into a murder hunt. Questions flooded in. Who would do something so horrible to Gemma, and why? Detectives worked around the clock, studying the suitcase and examining the canal for more evidence. Divers searched the water for anything else that might have been thrown away. Soon they located a severed head in the same canal, which was later confirmed to belong to Gemma. It became clear that whoever had killed her had also gone to shocking lengths to hide the crime. The brutality of dismembering a victim was a level of violence that left seasoned police officers deeply shaken. 4. Gemma's family. The pain was impossible to describe. Her brother Tony, who had been living with her, gave interviews acting devastated, playing the part of a grieving brother. Yet police quietly placed him under closer surveillance, watching for inconsistencies in his story. The brutality of the murder, the familiarity of the victim with her killer, and the fact that there was no forced entry into the house, all pointed in one tragic direction. Gemma, once a local star full of promise, had been taken from the world in the most heartbreaking way imaginable. And the hunt for justice was only beginning. In the days following the discovery of Gemma McCluskie's remains, detectives focused their attention on the person who had been closest to her, her brother Tony. He had lived with Gemma in the Bethnal Green house and was among the last people to see her alive. From the beginning, Tony had told police that Gemma left the house, but no one had ever confirmed that. After an argument, it never came back, but small details in his story were starting to fall apart. Investigators quietly reviewed CCTV footage from around the area on the night Gemma disappeared, hoping to catch any trace of her movements. What they found was deeply troubling. The cameras showed Tony struggling to drag a large suitcase through the streets late at night. The bag seemed heavy and awkward, and its color and size matched the suitcase later. It's pulled from Regent's Canal. The timestamp on the footage lined up with the hours after Gemma was last seen alive. Investigators compared the image of Tony on CCTV with the timeline of Gemma's disappearance, and their suspicion grew stronger. They believed they were seeing the very moment he tried to dispose of his sister's body. Police decided to bring Tony in for more questioning, pressing him about the suitcase and the footage. At first, Tony stuck to his story, claiming he had no idea where Gemma went. But faced with the evidence, he began to break down. Detectives pushed harder, showing him the images from the CCTV and listing the forensic evidence recovered from the suitcase. Finally, Tony confessed to what he had done. He told police that he and Gemma had argued that night. The fight was over his drinking, which Gemma had grown sick and tired of. Tony said he lost his temper, hitting her in a blind rage. He claimed that Gemma fell and hit her head, and in a panic, he decided to cover it up. Instead of calling for help, he chose to hide her body. His story, however, was hard to believe. The level of violence suggested something far more sinister than an accidental death. After killing Gemma, Tony had dismembered her body, packed it into the suitcase, and dumped it into the canal like garbage. Tony's confession horrified the community. People could not comprehend how a brother could kill his own sister, then pretend to grieve beside her friends and family. Neighbors, who knew them both, struggled to accept the truth. They remembered Gemma as gentle and protective, often trying to help Tony despite his problems. That her kindness had been repaid with such brutality was beyond imagination. Detectives charged Tony McCluskie with murder. Determined to hold him accountable for Gemma's death, the community was heartbroken, but also relieved that someone would face justice. As Tony waited in custody for trial, Gemma's friends and loved ones tried to pick up the pieces, holding on to the good memories she had left behind. The case had shown that danger could hide in the most familiar places, and trust could be betrayed in the most terrible ways. Tony McCluskie's trial began later in 2012, drawing intense public attention. The details of the case were so shocking that many people struggled to listen, yet they felt compelled to know how a brother could do something so horrific. Prosecutors laid out the evidence clearly. Tony had killed his sister during a drunken argument, then gone to chilling lengths to cover up his crime. The CCTV footage of him dragging the suitcase through the streets was shown to the jury, along with forensic proof linking the suitcase directly to Gemma's remains. Every detail made it harder to believe Tony's story that Gemma's death had been a tragic accident. During the trial, Tony insisted he had not meant to kill Gemma. He claimed the fight escalated, that he lashed out in anger and lost control, and that panic drove him to hide her body. But the jury found it impossible to ignore the violence of dismembering her, the cold calculation of sealing her remains in bags, the heartless decision to dump her in a canal. It felt deliberate, cruel, and far beyond a simple moment of rage. The prosecution argued that Tony had been driven by resentment toward his sister, who often challenged him about his drinking and demanded he change. Rather than change, he silenced her forever. The community waited anxiously for the verdict. When the jury found Tony McCluskie guilty of murder, there was a sense of grim relief. He was sentenced to life in prison, a punishment that reflected the horror of what he had done. But no prison sentence could heal the pain left behind. Gemma's loved ones were left to pick up the shattered pieces of their lives, struggling to accept how quickly everything had fallen apart. Gemma, who had once dreamed of returning to her acting career, would never get the chance to see her future unfold. Friends and fans mourned Gemma deeply. Vigils were held again in her honor, with candles and flowers placed along the canal where her remains had been found. Former EastEnders cast members paid tribute, remembering her bright personality and the kindness she showed to everyone on set. People described Gemma as someone who lifted others up, who never let hardship crush her spirit. That spirit was now gone, and the loss felt enormous. The murder of Gemma McCluskie left a chilling legacy, showing how violence can hide behind the doors of an ordinary home, waiting for the worst moment to strike. It taught people that even a family member could become a threat, no matter how impossible that might seem. Gemma's story has remained a tragic, cautionary tale in East London, a reminder of how quickly life can be taken away and how fragile trust can be. As the years have passed, Gemma's name continues to live on through the memories of those who loved her. Her smile, her kindness, and her dreams have never been forgotten. In the end, though Tony tried to erase her from the world, Gemma's legacy proved far stronger, reminding everyone that her light could not be extinguished so easily.